Sometimes there's a lag. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. First off, by saying congratulations and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. A nomination to the Broadcom Masters is a huge honor, and so we're glad you've taken the next step in our process by opening your application. I'm Allie Stiefel, the former program manager for the Broadcom Masters. I'm here today with my colleague, Reva Ramadorai. Our team at the Society is responsible for the Broadcom Masters program. You likely have, and will continue to, receive many emails from us throughout the application process. We are here to help you every step of the way. This session is being recorded so that other students who cannot join us today can also hear this information.
As you are likely aware, the application is due this Wednesday, June 14th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. That's just a few days away, but definitely enough time to complete the application. Hundreds of students open and submit their applications on the deadline day each year. We do not encourage this, but we share this information to illustrate that it's possible to complete in a short period of time, and you are ahead of the game. Today, we are going to give a brief overview of the Broadcom Masters program, in case you are not yet aware of the exciting opportunities that lie ahead when you submit your application. Then we will do a quick review of each section of the application because you probably have a few questions. Then we will spend the majority of our time today answering your questions. You can ask your questions in the chat box to the left of the screen.
Broadcom Masters is a program of Society for Science and the Public, which is the organization where Reva and I work. The Society is a nonprofit organization dedicated to the public engagement in the scientific community. The Society runs 3 distinguished science competitions. The first is the Intel International Science and Engineering Fair, the world's largest international pre-college science competition. It's open to high school students. Our second competition is the Regeneron Science Talent Search, which is the nation's oldest and most prestigious math and science competition for high school seniors. So 2 programs for you all to look forward to entering in the future. Thirdly, our final program is the Broadcom Masters, which we're here to talk about today, and is the competition you have been nominated for.
The Broadcom Math, Applied Science, Technology, and Engineering Rising Stars, or Masters, is the premier national science fair-based competition for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students. In order to qualify for the Masters, a student must place within the top 10% in a society-affiliated science fair. You've already completed this step. Nominated students are invited to apply to the national competition online. As you know, the application is due on Wednesday.
So if you submit your application by the deadline, not only will you be in the running for a spot as a top 300 master or a top 30 finalist, but you'll also receive a package in the mail and in a couple of weeks. This package will include a t-shirt, bumper sticker, a book of invention and innovation stories from Science News magazine, courtesy of the Lemelson Foundation. We hope that you wear your entrance shirt proudly because you definitely earned it. You'll also join our alumni network, which often gathers alumni together in cities across the country for networking opportunities, panels, and more.
So what happens next? You submit your application, then what? Over the summer, all entries will be read by 3 evaluators. Our team tabulates the scores and uses this information to determine the top 300 masters, formerly known as semifinalists. This means the projects and applications that are the top 300 middle school scientists and engineers in the country. This year, we will announce the top 300 masters via email on September 6th. The 300 masters receive a special prize package, which includes a semifinalist ribbon and certificate, backpack, subscription to Wolfram Mathematica, an invention journal from the Lemelson Foundation, and more. Not only that, but we'll pick the top 30 finalists from the top 300 masters.
Let's talk about the top 30 finalists. You've likely heard from former finalists in previous webinars. Their stories are inspiring, and I encourage you to watch the 2 alumni webinars if you've not yet seen them. They're full of great advice from students who are just like you.
The top 30 finalists will be announced on September 20th. There is not an extra step between the top 300 and the top 30 round. If you are in consideration, you do not need to complete any extra paperwork or questions. The top 30 finalists will be invited to come to Washington, D.C. in late October for a week of fun, hands-on STEM challenges, teamwork, and competition. They will compete for more than $100,000 in prizes. The Society covers all expenses for finalists.
The Finals Week experience, where the top 30 gather in D.C., is memorable, life-changing, and fun. The competitive events of Finals Week are a little different from many other science competitions. All finalists will present their research projects to the judges, just like a typical science fair. However, that counts for only 25% of their final score for the week, and that's because the project has already carried them through many rounds of competition. The rest of the score comes from the hands-on team STEM challenges. We divide the 30 finalists into teams, and they spend 2 days solving problems through science, technology, engineering, and math. There are a few photos on this slide on the right-hand side of students participating in a few challenges. One example of a challenge from a prior year is when students had to engineer a fake crab claw with their team that could lift a certain amount of weight. The judges observe the teams in these challenges, which cover all fields of STEM. So if engineering is not your thing, never fear. There's a challenge for pretty much every subject. The judges observe the teams, and then they decide the winners based on their observations. The top prize of the Broadcom Masters competition is the $25,000 Samueli Prize, awarded to the most well-rounded STEM student. You can read more about other prizes offered at Finals Week on our website, because there are a lot more.
So besides the competition, finalists make friends for life, meet STEM leaders from academia, industry, and government, and are inspired to pursue STEM careers. They go on amazing field trips, like to the White House, the Tesla factory, and Lucasfilm, and they go on to do amazing things, like win the International Science Fair, work at SpaceX, attend the White House Science Fair, and present their projects at the Iron Man 3 movie premiere. And they're highlighted as role models in their communities.
So just imagine, this could be you. Just by submitting your application, you are putting yourself out there for amazing prizes and life-changing opportunities. You will also be honored on our website as an entrant just for entering. You've already placed in the top 10% of science fair participants around the country this year, which is amazing. So we want to honor you for that work, and we want you to feel encouraged because you've already been identified as a champion. Congratulations.
So now we're going to talk about the application, but just briefly. For a more in-depth overview, check out our videos about each section in the Video Resources tab in the upper right-hand corner of your application.
Great. So bear with us for a quick minute. I'm just going to swap the screen. But in the meantime, if you have any questions about the application or about information we've just presented, after we talk about the application sections, we're going to spend a lot of time answering your questions. So feel free to ask us your questions in this chat box. I see you, Giancarlo. Hello. And please do ask your questions there, and we will answer them at the end of this webinar. So at any point during the rest of the webinar, feel free to chat your questions to us. So bear with us for one moment, please. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about each section of the application. As Reva mentioned, we've already provided videos that you can watch that will cover these sections more in depth. But because the application is closing soon, We know you probably have a lot of questions on the top of your mind. So we'll go through some of our more frequently asked questions or things that we think are most important to keep in mind, just to make you feel comfortable and familiar with this application. So the screen you see here is the screen that you should see when you log into your application. I assume by now that you've already opened your application. Because you're watching this webinar, you got an email from us. So we're going to skip that part and just talk about the inside of the application. So this is the screen you see when you first log in. If you scroll down a bit, you'll see the tasks. You see where the mouse is here. And these are all the different tasks that you need to complete before you can hit this submit button. As you can see, our friend Broadcom Bear has not done much in his application yet, so the system won't actually allow him to submit. So for our sample today, we'll go through some of these. So a couple of things I wanted to point out here on this home screen. First is the designated adult email address. When you register your account, maybe your parent helped you and gave you permission to use their email. If not, then you need to add your parent's email account to this application. You do that by not hitting add members. You actually want to hit edit and view. And this is where you can add a member or a parent to your email account. You can only add one person here. And when you add your parent, then it means that they'll receive emails about your application along with the email address used to register your account. If you already used a parent email to register your account, no need to worry about this unless you wanted to add a second parent. All right, so part one, formal registration. If you hit the start button, you'll see this is all basic kind of demographic information about your name, your address, how we can get a hold of your parent or guardian. All of this information is kept private. The only people who see the parts in section one, in part one, are me and our staff members here at the society. We are not judges, we are not evaluators. So this is information that only is used for internal purposes. Also note, I'm not going to go on to page 2 for this just for the sake of time, but please keep in mind as you work on your application that many applications or many of the sections and parts have a second page. So at the bottom of this section, you'll see it says save and continue to the next page. That means there's a second page of information that asks about teacher and school information. I want to mention something about that page, the teacher information. Think carefully about which teacher you put as your teacher associated with your application. It does need to be a teacher. Unfortunately, it cannot be a scout leader or a mentor. It does need to be a teacher at your current middle school. And you cannot change this teacher after you submit your application. So if you become a semifinalist or a finalist, this teacher could be eligible for prizes, and those prizes are required to be given away to a middle school teacher. So think about that because you cannot change the person after you submit your application. Great. So moving on to talking about part 2 of the application, which is your project information. This is probably the section of the application you are most excited to fill out. It's the section that's about your project. And most of the questions on the second page of part 2 are designed to feel like a judging interview. For the first page, you're required to do a couple things that I wanted to point out because they're really important. The first thing you have to do is select a category. And just like the text says here, you can choose any category you want. It does not have to be the same category that you competed in at your local science fair. In fact, your local science fair might have had different categories. It's totally fine to change it. When you change or when you select your category, you should think about what kind of scientists would most understand your project. That might help you think about the category you want to enter in. We don't have any quotas, so it's not like we pick an equal number of animal science versus mathematic projects. When we pick the top 30 finalists, it doesn't work like that at all. We ask you to pick a category to help make sure you're getting the best judging possible for your project. So I'm just going to randomly pick one right now. So I can move on to page 2 in a minute. The other thing I want to point out is the project title. The project title is something you cannot change after you hit submit. So again, if you're picked as a semi-finalist or a finalist, we're going to use the same project title, you know, all the way through October. So keep that in mind. You can put whatever you want, but it cannot be changed after you submit. Great. Here you'll select your current grade, and that actually, I know right now is kind of a tricky time, and we do get a lot of questions about what grade should I pick, because it's summer break right now, right? But we want you to pick the grade you were in when you were nominated. So that means what grade you were in starting in, you know, last fall when you started school, or what grade maybe you just finished like last week if your school just let out. So the 2016-2017 school year, not the grade that you're going to be in next year. We want to know what grade you were in when you were nominated. All right, so here you'll pick if you're a team project. Worth mentioning here in this webinar that if you did a team project, each member of your team must submit their own application in their own words. This is really important just to make sure that we can see that all the team members understand the project. And then also if one team member chose not to apply, and another team member did, then you know, we would be able to choose the one student who did enter. So we do have a couple of reasons why. If you have more questions about that, you can email us at masters@societyforscience.org. But just a reminder, if you did a team project, you each need to submit your own application. All right, so the other thing to note about this section is, again, there are multiple pages for this section. So you'll hit save and continue to next page, where you will see a whole bunch of essay questions about your application, about your project, I'm sorry. And this might seem overwhelming at first, but trust me, you guys know this stuff backwards and forward. This is your project. You worked really hard on it. You presented it at your local science fair. You know your stuff. And as I mentioned before, these questions were kind of designed to feel like a judging interview. So for Broadcom Masters competition here, you're only able to submit your research in writing through this application. Our evaluators cannot interview you to pick the top 300 and top 30. The only content that they can view is what they read in this application. So this means that anything you want to communicate about your project needs to be within these questions. So here's what I recommend to students all the time, is if you're stumped on these questions or it seems overwhelming at first, ask your mom or dad or your sibling or a friend to ask you these questions out loud, because I guarantee you already know these answers. And if you record yourself answering these questions, then you probably have already answered 75% of this application. You can type up your answers, make them sound anything you might have left out, you can add, but I think that's a really good starting point if you're feeling overwhelmed. The other thing is you probably also have this information in writing somewhere because you made a project board. I think probably in most cases you made a research board that showed your research on like a 3-panel science fair board, or maybe it was a flat poster. Whatever the case, you probably already wrote a lot of this up and it can probably be reused here. So recommend looking at that for inspiration too. If you did an engineering project, some of these questions have alternative prompts to help you better answer your question. If you want to get into detail about what we're really looking for each of these questions, again, I recommend you watch the videos we created that are in your video resources tab about this section. So it goes into more detail about what we're looking for each question. But these are the main things that I wanted to point out today about that. So we're going to move on to part 3. Part 3 are your creative essay questions. So there are 3 different essay questions that you'll need to answer. And each of these questions have 2 choices. So the 3 categories of questions are 1, about my project, 2, about me, and 3, solve a problem. So within each of these essay categories, You would select which you would like to answer. You only have to answer one. There is a word limit. A note quickly about word limits. You would have also encountered this in part 2. We know they're tricky. We know that maybe, you haven't encountered having to type in word limits very much before in your academic careers up until this point. So we understand it's tricky. We think it's a good thing for you to learn. So what you might try to do is copy what you want to write, put it in a Word document, and learn to condense and consolidate what you want to say. It's a really good skill to have moving forward into high school and college. So we know it's tricky and it might require some time to cut down your words, but hey, it's a great skill you're learning, so think about it that way. So these creative essay questions, a lot of people ask us, why on earth do you want to know this about us? Do we need to answer these questions? Don't you just care about our project? And the answer to that is no. You've already showed your amazing project at your local science fair. That's what got you nominated. We care a lot about your project. It's what our evaluators are going to read about, but they also want to learn a little bit more about you, how you think, how creative you are, and how you solve problems. So that's why we've included these essay questions. It's a way for us to learn a little bit more about you. We're trying to pick 30 well-rounded STEM students, so that includes your research project, but also some of the other extra things about you. Sorry, guys. I logged right on out of Broadcom Bear's application. All right, we're going to move on to part 4. This is the section about personal interests. So again, this is an area where you can tell us about yourself. We want to know about the activities you do at school, your hobbies. We want to know about a time you worked in a team. These are all great things for us to know about you. This is also a great chance if you thought it was important about other awards you've won, you could list them here. And we also want to know what career interests you in the future. So again, just to learn a little bit more about you and the activities you're involved in. What we're not looking for here is we don't care if you only care about science and that's your life, that's amazing. If you have a whole bunch of different activities, that's amazing too. So don't feel like you have to present a different version of yourself. We want to see your true self and all the cool hobbies that you're involved in. Oh, I did it again. So sorry. It's habit. This is what we do when we fix your applications. Great. So let's talk a little bit about the science fair paperwork section, because we do get a lot of questions about this. And I will say, for the sake of today's webinar, if you have a specific question about paperwork that you need to fill out for your project, we're not going to answer those questions in the webinar today. I recommend that you email us at masters@societyforscience.org what your specific concern is, and we'll address it there. We also, this weekend, are answering that email account every couple of hours to get back to you all as quickly as possible. We know there are a lot of nominees who are working on their applications this weekend. So if you do email us, rest be assured we'll get back to you in a couple of hours. So about the science fair paperwork section, what we're looking for here in some cases is paperwork just to show that an adult approved your project and that you were safe and that your subjects were safe when you did your research. We actually only require a few types of projects to share their paperwork with us. We know that, a lot of the times you might have paperwork that you completed for your regional science fair, but you don't necessarily need to give it to us unless you are asked for it by this system. So the way that this works is you would click, where you did your research. Maybe I did my pretend project at home and at school, so I'll click both. And then you're asked what aspects among the following were used in your research. You must click one. So you see a whole bunch of choices here. If my project was about, I don't know, plants, I would not need to click most of any of these, right? So I would click none of the above. If you click none of the above, then this red message at the bottom where my mouse is going to appear. It says, thank you. You do not need to submit any paperwork to Broadcom Masters for additional review. we recommend that you save copies of any paperwork you may have completed for your personal records. So if you worked with anything that's not listed above here, don't worry about the forms. You would just hit Save Return to Menu page, one less thing to worry about. Again, even if you filled out forms for your science fair at home, we don't need to see them unless the system tells you. So let's go back up and let's change our answer. Let's say I didn't work with plants, but let's say I worked with vertebrate animals. So I'm going to scroll down, and there's a different message here. There is a message that asks me to upload my science fair paperwork. So what exactly do I need to upload? If I competed at a science fair that had me fill out official Intel ISEF paperwork and official ISEF forms, then that's what I would submit here. If my school has a special form that they do instead of Intel ISEF forms, then I might upload that instead. If you filled out forms, but you don't have access to them, or say you are not sure if you filled out approval forms or not, here's what you would do. You would write a letter that you would upload instead that explains where you did your research, who supervised you and what safety precautions you took, what approval processes you might have gone through to get your project idea approved. Maybe you submitted your project idea to a teacher at school. Describe that to us, tell us the name of the teacher, any information you can provide about safety and process of approval is very helpful to us. And then you would upload that letter instead. Then there are also some questions here that give us a little more information about, again, approval process and safety that we just want to know just to make sure that everyone was safe when this project took place. In this section, the only people who see this are our staff. Judges don't see this section. This is for internal purposes. The other thing to know is in this section, we are not looking for your full research paper. This application does not require that. It does not require an abstract in a separate form to be uploaded here. No links. If you submit a link to a video or an external website, the evaluators are not allowed to click on it. So don't try to add more content to your essays, provide more information about your project. They only see what you submit in your text boxes here in the application. So don't try to upload extra information. And again, if you have specific questions about this, because we know it can be confusing, please do just email the master's account, and we are happy to address this on a case-by-case basis. That's what we're here for. Great, the visual aid. We get a lot of questions about the visual aid as well. So as I mentioned before, in the application, we do not, the evaluators can only score your paper based off of the essay questions. They can also look at one 8.5 by 11 visual aid that you put together of any graphs or data or charts or photographs that you think are required to understand your research. We definitely want to see your data as much as possible. It gets a little tricky because this 8.5 by 11 document is not a lot of room. So you will have to be selective when choosing what graphs to describe or best describe your research. Judges cannot zoom in. They really see what is approximate to an 8.5 by 11 image on their screen. So I would not recommend making stuff really small because they can't zoom in too much. And yeah, so this is a visual representation of the data you would like to share with the judges. We recommend to students that you can reference this within your essays. Like if you wanted to say, for example, and there's an essay question in part 2 about analyzing your data, you could say, oh, see figure 2 on my visual aid for an example of this. So that's a good way to reference your material. I also recommend sometimes the system, if you're worried about specific formulas or what is the word I'm looking, specific formulas or symbols, thank you, Reva, or symbols, and they're not appearing correctly in the essay questions, or you're just worried that it won't look the way it's supposed to look, I recommend putting it in your visual aid, and then you can reference this within your application. The essay questions say, oh, I have this formula I used. If I want to make sure that you understand what I did, and you can see this formula listed in figure B of my visual aid. Or if you wanted to, your visual aid could just be one big graph. It's really up to you how you want to make this opportunity to share graphics work for you. I've seen students do it many ways over the years, but this is what it's intended for: charts, photographs that do not have your face. They can't have your face, and things like that, data. Not an opportunity to write more essays and more answers. The other thing to note about both the Science Fair paperwork section and your parent permission form and the visual aid is that our system does require PDF documents. If you don't know how to convert your file into a PDF, or you need some help doing it, or our system is acting a little funky, we're happy to help. If you email whatever file you have that you're trying to convert to upload it, just email it to us at masters@societyforscience.org, and we're happy to help you get it done. No problem. Parent permission form, we don't really need to click on that. That's just another thing you have another document you have to upload within our application, just so that we know that you had your parents' permission to submit and enter this competition. So once your application is totally complete, you are able to, well, I didn't actually submit any sections. You're able to do a couple of things. One, in this example, this is a bad example, I'll admit, but let's pretend you have submitted one of the sections of the application. From there until after you submit, you'll see a blue button right here where my mouse is moving at the kind of above all of these tasks here that says download. And that's where you can download your application. I recommend that you save a copy after you submit, where you can see your full application. Make sure it looks the way that you want it to look and that all your essays are there. So that's a step I definitely recommend you take. And then when you're ready, you can hit submit. You can submit on the deadline day, or if you're pretty much done and you just have tweaks to make, I recommend that you submit now. Why not? You can continue to edit your application as long as you save the section. You can resave the section, and it will save your information and freshen up your application up until the deadline. So until June 14th at 8 p.m., even if you've already submitted your application, you can continue to work on it. You do not need to hit resubmit, but if you save the section, then the content will save. All right, the other thing to be aware of, once you hit submit, you should receive a confirmation email. If you do not receive your confirmation email, let us know, and we're happy to verify if your application really was submitted. It might be that you just didn't hit the second submit button that this screen takes you to or something like that, but it's important that you received that confirmation email. All right, I think that covers what we wanted to get into today as far as the application. Again, I recommend if you have more questions about the application, definitely check out the video resources. I'll click on this page here so you can see. Here where my mouse is now, you can see all these different videos are about each section of the application. They go into a little more detail than we did today. So if you're really curious, you can check that out. Certainly not required, but they're there to help you if you need them. And if you're curious about some of our other webinars we've hosted, the links are here. Also on our YouTube page here, on our YouTube channel rather, you can watch. I think that there are two that are not linked here, but they're available on the YouTube page. A couple of other great resources we definitely recommend you check out. Our highlights video from the 2016 competition. It's awesome to hear from peers who are just like you and what their experience was like in Broadcom Masters. So if you watch that video, I think that'll pump you up to get your application in. And then lastly, we have all these are awesome videos here that have students' names. These were all finalists in the 2015 competition. And they put these videos together for us about their advice with the application. And the application has not changed very much since 2015. Here and there are some differences, but we kept them up because we thought they were just so great. And I think they have some great advice for you if you have the time to tune in today or until the deadline. All right, so I think that we're ready to take some questions from the audience.
There are a few.
There are a few. All right, Reva, you want to call out some questions? Yeah, so there's a question here from Laxmi. Is there a specific format you look for in our hypothesis? The answer is no. We are very flexible in terms of what you submit. I think a big thing to consider, not just for the hypothesis question, but for all of the questions, is to explain why. So don't just tell us your hypothesis, but also maybe explain in a short few words why you thought it was going to be that way. And that's true for pretty much all of the questions. We don't want to just know what you did. We want to know if you understand why.
So there's another question about AMA or Emily.
Okay, so someone asked about, so Kush Grover has asked about, Gruber. He'd like to know if we prefer AMA or MLA format. And some of you may or may not know what that means, and that's okay, because for us, it does not matter. Whatever you've been trained in using, or if you haven't been trained in either format of writing a scientific paper, that's fine. We do not require a scientific paper. We know we have students who are in the 6th through 8th grade who enter this competition. So as an equalizer, we don't require that. So don't worry about it. If you want to, that's fine. When you answer your essay questions, to format things a certain way, but it's neither are required.
We have another question about project continuations.
Yeah, so we have a question from Shreya Arora about continuation projects. Shreya asks, if our project is a continuation, should we say that and state what we have done each year, or should we just say everything we have done without specifically splitting it up? So this is a great question, continuation projects. One, yes, you definitely should mention that this was a continuation project. You also should not really talk much about your results from the other 2 years, just for your work that was nominated at your local science fair this year. That's because we're not sure if your other research was nominated in prior years, so you really need to focus on what was done in this past academic year. You absolutely can reference the other work. I'm sure it probably informed your hypothesis for this work and informed your procedures and provides a lot of background, but you do need to focus on what you learned in this past year on this application.
Okay, next we have a few questions about the one-page visual aid. So I think Allie did talk about that in detail a little bit. Then we had another question about if it can be in landscape format instead of portrait. I would say yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whatever fits your project best and how you want to display your data is totally fine.
Yep.
Okay. We have another question from Fairneck. He asks, do we have to answer each prompt strictly with what is required, or can we build on the prompt to create a more dynamic answer?
That's a great question, Fairneck. You can definitely build on the prompt to create a more dynamic answer. We have under several prompts in section 2, you'll notice we have like bullet points under some of them. That's just to make sure you're getting to the points that we want you to get to, but you don't have to just only answer those parts. You can certainly extrapolate and get into deeper answers. That's totally fine. We just kind of have the others there as a minimum of what we want you to talk about. Okay, a question from Joey. He asks, my project is very similar to a project that was a finalist last year. By the time I had finished my project, I did not know of the project. Will that affect the judging process for my project? Okay, so that's a really good question. And I think this is a bigger question about scientific research in general. it's fine. You should submit to us what you have and not worry necessarily about what the other student has done. I'm sure there are differences in your work. We will be screening for plagiarism, but I'm sure your project isn't going to be 100% matched to this other student's project. Your inspirations could have been very different. Who helped you is very different. So focus on yourself and what you did. Do not worry about what other students are doing. You don't know for sure that like I said, your inspirations were the same. Your data might look very different. How you analyzed things might be very different. And that's science. A lot of people work on the same drug development, but they go about it in very different ways. You might have seen the bio of the student, but we do not share their full application. So you don't know for sure that it's exactly the same, and I can almost guarantee that it's not. So I would focus more on yourself and worry less about other people. Great advice for life in general. Yeah.
So Maureen had a question about, is there anywhere to include a research paper? And it looks like you guys kind of answered that for her.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Yeah, the answer is
correct.
Yeah. Consider the essay as your research paper. I will actually just answer, there was a question from Fairnick again about can you, or what are the judges looking for in the applications and the answers? And I'll answer that by saying we do not reveal our rubric. We don't make our rubric public. We also will not reveal scores after the application is submitted or after we pick semifinalists or finalists. We get a lot of requests for feedback, and we just can unfortunately not accommodate answering, providing feedback for every application. But in general, I will say that creativity is important. Explaining, the judges definitely want to know that you understand what you did. So it's really good to, as I mentioned with the hypothesis question, always think about explaining why you did that. You have this application is a one-time shot to explain what you did. There's no back and forth in an interview. So being thorough is really important. Making sure that all of it's in there is probably a good thing to keep in mind as you work on it.
Okay, so we have a question from Samuel Rosner. He asked, can we assume that the judges have a degree in our project's field?
Yes, absolutely. Our judges are typically PhD scientists, or depending on the field, sometimes master's scientists, and also educators who specialize in different subject areas. So it's a mix of all three. Every paper is read 3 times. So yes, we do divide the scoring by category. As we mentioned, that's why when you pick your category, it's important to think about what kind of scientists should be reading your paper to best understand it.
Okay, so we have another question about the visual aid. If you have a formula that is in words, can you include that in the visual aid? So if there are words in the formula?
Oh, that's totally fine. Yeah. And it's fine to have some visuals in your or some words in your visual aid. Like maybe you need a caption for a photograph to explain what's happening. Totally fine. But when we say no text, what we really mean is like, don't write 5 paragraphs.
Another question about the visual aid. Should they put their project and name on the visual?
No, that is not necessary. Do not put your name on it. And as we mentioned before, and as the rules state, do not put your face in any photographs. We will actually go through and we will cover any faces that we find in photographs. So please help us save a step and do not do that.
Give the answers.
Oh, here's a question from Tommy. I'm sorry if I maybe spoke a little fast. Tommy asks, please tell us again where we can write see figure 1 in visual aid. I just recommended that as a tactic if you wanted to use it within your essay questions about your project. So in any of them, if there was something specific that you wanted to tell the evaluator or judge reading your paper, oh yeah, here's this cool thing I built. Why don't you take a look at my visual aid to see it? You could really do that in almost any question in section 2, whatever you want to do.
Particular question.
What tense should the responses concerning the research be in? Where should or shouldn't we use personal pronouns? So this is a great question from Morgan E. For us, it does not matter at all. In real scientific research, of course, it would be different. What you're doing is real, of course, absolutely. But what I mean is we're doing essay questions rather than a full research paper. So in a full research paper, that would matter. In our essay questions, it does not. We encourage you to do whatever makes most sense for you. I'm going to tell you a story that I don't encourage you to do this, but this is a real story that happened. We had a student who was a finalist, I think 2 years ago, who did the whole application on his iPhone, and he used all lowercase letters. He did not have one capital letter. The good research is good research, and that's what we're looking for. I don't recommend that, but that's what happened.
We have another question from Lakshmi asking, can we use some data from literature in addition to our experimental data to support our conclusion?
Absolutely. That's definitely what you want to do. That helps explain why. So yeah, absolutely feel free to use data from books or literature, the scientific literature, to support your conclusions. Absolutely. So I saw a back and forth here where it looks like Elise asked, can we link to a certain article that gave us information about our project? You can if you want to. We don't require that, but you certainly can if you wanted to do that. We're just looking for a few more questions here. James Cohen, you are asking about your project category. You can choose whatever category you want. So if you wanted to keep your project in the same category as your state or regional fair, you can definitely do that. If you wanted to change your category to something different, you can totally do that too. It is up to you.
Okay, Tommy has a question about science fair paperwork. Did you say in the science fair paperwork not to submit your full project, which I have already formatted in a PDF?
Yeah, so Tommy and anyone else who's wondering, if you wrote a research paper about your project, like a full paper, maybe for school or maybe for your science fair, we do not require that for this competition. So you would not need to upload that in your science fair paperwork. We're just looking for forms, like approval forms.
Lakshmi has another question about references. Do we have to include references if we use literature data?
Yeah, you should at least mention it within the essay where the source came from. Okay, so here's a question from Flick of Fury that I definitely want to answer. The question is, I heard there will be a test held for Broadcom Science Fair. Is there an exact date the test will be held, and what is included on the test? Nope, that's not something we do. When you submit your application by Wednesday of this week, that's all you have to worry about until you are, then we pick the top 300. If you are in that top 300, you can just sit back and relax, and then we'll announce the top 30. We don't have anything you have to do between the top 300 and top 30 announcement. Nothing is required, like no test, no extra step, no paperwork. If you are in the top 30, we do not issue a test, but it is a competition that you would come to in person. All expenses are paid, so you don't have to worry about that. No costs are incurred by students, and you bring one parent with you to the competition. We pay for the parent as well. And that's in late October. So that's not a test. You would do hands-on activities and present your research, and there's no studying involved for that. Yes, Giancarlo, if we have any questions after the stream, can we email you? Absolutely. If you have any questions, please email masters@societyforscience.org. We have about 5 or 6 staff members who are monitoring that account regularly. And so we recommend strongly that you email that account because we are happy to get back to you as quickly as possible.
Mehmet asks, should we be concerned if we aren't approaching the word limit on the application question?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Mehmet, because we're asked that a lot. And the answer is no, not at all. Some students are going to hit the max word limit just because their project is a wordy project, and some are not. And that doesn't have any reflection on the science at all. When we print the top 30 papers, top 30 applications every year, some are very thick and some are not that thick. Not as many pages. It's just some students write more succinctly than others. That has no reflection on your research, and we find that there are no patterns involved that you have to meet the word limit for every question. Absolutely not. Do you pick?
Yeah. So
do you pick 300 from all categories or a fixed number from each? The question from Tommy. So that question is a good one. And the answer is we pick from all categories. We don't have any quotas. So we don't have any requirements that we have to say we have to have 10 projects from each category, or we have to have an equal number of projects from every state. We don't do that here. We just pick the best science. We also don't put limitations on number of finalists per school or things like that. So what we read or what we pick is what we pick in terms of the scores. So no, I would say any project has as good of a chance as any other project as making it to the finals.
And Joey asked a follow-up question, are there set numbers per each grade, or is it for everyone?
That's a good question. So no, there's no set number per grade. It really is for everyone. And what's actually really interesting, and I think is worth sharing with this audience, we've shared it before, so the application is blind. So I mentioned that the judges do not see anything you write in part 1, so they don't know certain things about you. And we have actually had our finalist pool has very closely matched our entrant pool the last several years, which is awesome. So like, I think 20% of all applicants are usually in the 6th grade, and usually about 20% of all finalists are. And that's by total coincidence. That's not a criteria. We're not looking for that. If it ever seems like we're doing it on purpose, we're totally not. It really is a coincidence. So that tells you that a 6th grader really does have as good of a chance as an 8th grader based on percentages who are applying. So that's pretty cool. For the additional information section, can you elaborate on what we should write about? That's a question from Elise. So I think Elise is referring to part 4 of the application, where you tell us about your activities and all about you. The final question is, anything else we should know about you? And no, we're not looking for anything in particular. It's just your chance to tell us something else about you. You know, I've seen students do all kinds of things with that section over the years. Sometimes students leave it blank, which is fine. Sometimes students write a poem. Sometimes a student will just say, I'm so excited to be nominated. Thank you. Sometimes students will explain a little bit more about a special prize they've won, or a student will go into a little more about, like, I just want to let you know I'm from a really small town, and I traveled really far to get to my lab. So it really runs the gamut. Anything that you think is cool about you that you would like for a judge to know, feel free to share in that section.
So Isabella asks, are some bullet point lists okay?
Totally. So Isabella's question is a good one. If you wanted to do like a bullet point list anywhere in the application rather than writing out paragraphs, that's totally allowed. It's I see that very often. People do that when we ask about their procedures or even some of the essay questions. However you want to do it is fine. We're all about being creative and finding the best way to present your data. It's all about being a strong communicator. So however best that works for you is good for us.
Hala asks, if we make it to the top 30 finalists, we have to bring our research book with us?
Yeah, that's a good question, Hala. If you make it as a top 30 finalist, you totally can bring your research book with you. It's not required. And I will say that if you make it as a top 30 finalist, I said it's a lot like when you present your research, it's a lot like a normal science fair, which is true in that you'll be in a room with other projects. You'll have your board there. Maybe you have your research book there, and judges will come around and ask you questions. But it is pretty different in that our judges will have already read your application many times. They'll have studied up on your project. They'll know a lot more about your project than your typical science fair judge at home. So they probably won't be coming up to you and saying, hey, just tell me about your project. Instead, they might ask for a little refresher, but then they're going to have specific questions that they've already prepared to ask you about your work. So in that vein, sometimes judges will look at your book. Sometimes they really won't have time if they already have questions for you. So if you have one to bring, we recommend that you bring it, but it's not required. So Maki Plays has a question about his visual aid, which is very common. So the question is, I'm having trouble with the visual aid because I have a lot of data and it's supposed to help the judges, but to make any of it make sense, it would have to be more than one page. What should I do? So this is a tough one because we know that you probably have a lot of great data that you want to share, especially as Maki says to make sure that, people can understand your project. Unfortunately, you cannot use more than one page. If you submit more than one page, our evaluators will not be able to see it. So you do have to make some tough choices. Maybe you have to submit the graph that illustrates one point, and then you can explain in a caption that this is one graph of many of data I collected, and you can kind of talk in one sentence as a caption about some of the other data you collected or use it as examples. You can try to get as much on there as possible without zooming in for someone to see, but we know it's a challenge. But just like in real life, if you were to publish your research paper, sometimes you only are allowed a few graphics. So you do have to make a call about what best illustrates your project. We know it's tough.
Yeah, definitely. So Crafteroo asks, will the judges know your grade and age?
No. Yes, they will. I'm sorry. They will, but they don't have quotas. Anything that's in section 1, the judges do not see, or in the science fair paperwork section. But that is a question in section 2, so I do believe they see that. But they don't know much else about you.
Giancarlo asks, if we get selected, can we use a slideshow? I believe show in our presentation.
Yeah, that's a good question. The answer is no. Well, you have to, if you are selected as a top 30 finalist, you are required to bring a trifold science fair board about your research to Washington, D.C. If you needed other props to help present your project, like a laptop computer at your booth, that would be allowed, but you have to make a board. And we actually, if you're selected as a finalist, of course, we pay for your travel, hotel, your food, and for one parent's travel, hotel, and food. We also mail you a blank project board for you to decorate and then mail back to us in time for the finals week. And we pay for all of that. So, so that helps.
So I think we've gone through all of the questions here so far. If we've missed anything,
yeah,
definitely email us.
Absolutely. And our email address is here on this slide. I'm sorry, it's a little fuzzy, it looks like, but it's masters@societyforscience.org. And we are answering that email account every couple of hours. We are here to help you guys. We know that you're going to do great on your applications. We cannot wait to read them. And we congratulate you because it's amazing to be in the top 10% of the whole country. So we know that you're already awesome. We hope you know that. And we can't wait to celebrate with you guys on Wednesday. So good luck.
Yeah, good luck and job well done so far.
Bye.